Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of November 20th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles that switch between hottest comics and trending comics. This week, we got trending comics once again, which is a more curated list written by Matt Tuck of books that are really starting to get liquid out there in the market. Now, we are also coming off of the heels of Heritage's big pedigree auction, and there are a lot of books that really broke records this past weekend, and I kind of wanted to take a look at them at the end of the video with you guys because a lot of the books on the list this week are books that are actually going down in value. But before I get into the video, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, doing those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into this video here today. Now, of course, I will put a link in the description. You guys know how I do this by now. I will break it down for you, but if you guys want to do your own reading, you can read the article written by Matt Tuck. But let's start here in the number 5 spot. And this is a really cool book to talk about, one that I know that I've never been able to talk about on this list before. But this one right here is AllStar Comics number 58, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 88th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1976, written by Gary Conroy, that would feature the first appearance of the DC character known as Power Girl. Now, seemingly, while most Marvel books are trending downward, it does feel like DC books are starting to, kind of turn the corner. A lot of people are really excited about DC books due to the fact that we recently got the announcement that James Gunn is going to be shepherding the kind of DC cinematic universe. And that's got a lot of people really excited about the potential for what is to come with the DC characters. A lot of people out there are already sort of specking on Lobo to a strong degree, but we also have characters like this Power Girl right here that a lot of people are thinking like, hey, who are the kind of gallery of characters that could be coming to the DC cinematic universe? We've never seen a character like Power Girl make their way to the screen. Maybe this would be a good character to sort of spec on, and that's kind of why you see books like this moving in the market. Now, Power Girl obviously is a character that a lot of comic book collectors tend to favor because of the fact, that she has very specific aesthetics that people really, really enjoy. And of course, that means that this character is always going to be popular amongst comic book collectors, and it'll be interesting to see if we ever get a version of Power Girl in sort of the DCEU. That could definitely make this book move in the future. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 99 in the census. Fair market value is 1650, although the one-year moving was 2563. But let's take a look at some of these numbers here because I think it is really interesting. When we look at some of the DC keys that didn't really have, the same sort of speculation that a lot of the MCU books had in 2021. Certainly, a lot of these prices for the DC books also went up in 2021 simply due to the fact that, there was just a large amount of liquidity that was kind of injected into the comic book market. But when you're looking at the values for this particular book, it doesn't feel like this one blew up so much that, it's bound to like crash, so to speak. I mean, it's definitely going to have a pullback. It's definitely going to have a correction. It's probably going to flirt with prices that it was selling for, around this time back in 2018, coming off of where it was selling for now, where you see there were certain sales, sitting around that $3,500 range. Back in 2018, it was around the $1,500 book. So it would make sense that this one has kind of a pullback to that $1,600 level, $1,700, $1,800, things like that. But it is interesting with a book like this because of the fact that now people are starting to get excited about it. And, I'm curious to think about where this book could go from here. It's probably a book that's going to correct, but not necessarily crash. You can see here at the 9.6 level, kind of a similar journey where I think that there was some speculation back here in 2015 and 2016 where maybe we were going to be getting this character in some kind of TV show or movie that had some interest in the market, kind of had a pullback right here in the 2019 time, went up in 2021, and kind of where it is now is actually selling a little bit less than where it had previously, specifically at the 9.6 level. So a lot of collectors are thinking, hey, maybe this is a good time to buy back into this book, especially if we are due to see this character in the future. And then, of course, at the low grade 1976 book, not going to see it slab there, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you see them being sold around that $70 to $80 level. All right, let's go on now to the fourth hottest trending comic of the week. And the fourth hottest trending comic of the week is one that I know that we've talked about before and one that makes sense as to why it is on the list this week. But this one right here is Invincible Iron Man Volume 3, number 1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 81st slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 2016, written by Brian Michael Bendis. That would be the first issue of the kind of ongoing Riri Williams series. This would also be the first time you see Ironheart there on on the cover and one of Riri Williams' first cover appearances. Now, of course, we're coming off the heels of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. There will be more books on this list that relate to that movie, and one of the characters that we got in the movie was, of course, Riri Williams. Now, it's really interesting when I think about a book like this, because this is definitely a book that has really gone down in value quite a bit. In fact, all of the Riri Williams keys were kind of a fire sale, I would say, this last week. I've had videos on the channel where I was talking about how, ironically, one of the better times seemingly to buy some of these books that are related to Black Panther is, incidentally, around the time when the Black Panther movie is actually coming out, and this one is no exception to that rule. This is a book that I think is, a tough one out there to kind of spec on for collectors because of the fact that, Riri Williams has a lot of different books that I think are competing for her kind of attention or for the market's kind of attention. You got her first cameo appearance, you got her first full appearance, you got her first solo title, you got this one, which is her first, Ironheart cover, and you got all these different books that are related to the character. And that is simply, what I like to call in fantasy football terms, running back by committee. A lot of the money that would go into, say, the first appearance of the book is spread thin, and that's going to make it hard for any one book to go to the moon. And when I look at a book like this is one that I think is really just for the collector. I mean, it is a really beautiful cover, and if you're someone who loves Riri Williams, this is one of those books that just sort of looks good in a slab on a shelf, not necessarily the book that, you're going to invest in and go to the moon with. And I think that's one of the reasons why the prices of this one have tanked so hard. But as we dig into those prices, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s, there is 1,471 in the census. Fair market value is $80. But you can see from the charts here, this is one that, basically did a roller coaster, went all the way up in 2021 and then has come all the way down, and kind of where it sells now at that $67 range. It's basically right in line to kind of where it was going for, at $50 in 2019 and 2020. And I think that that's probably a fair buy-in for this. And then, of course, being a modern book, not going to see it slapped to low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can see them being sold around that $15 or $20 price point. All right, let's go on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is a very curious one. This one for sure is surprising to see on the list this week, but this is Star Wars #4, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 75th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1977, written by Roy Thomas, that would be the adaptation of the Star Wars movies in comic book form, and this one right here would be the 4th issue of that series. Now, we've talked about Star Wars #1, 2, and even #3 to some degree on Hot Lists before, because those books right there, of course, are key issues that have first appearances of characters like Han Solo and Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker, etc. Certainly, Star Wars #1 is one of the key books of the Bronze Age, but this one right here, Star Wars #4, is the first issue in this run that doesn't really have a key distinction. And as Matt points out in the article, one of the reasons why this book could be, sort of showing up on the list this week is simply due to, we're kind of getting back to that time when it's really about collectors, right? Like the prices are coming down, things are correcting, people aren't so worried about what books to invest in, and now people are kind of being really choosy with their money, thinking, hey, I just want to buy the book that I want, and now that prices are kind of back in line, I can afford it once again. And I think there's probably a lot of people out there that want their Star Wars sets. They want issues 1 through 6, they want to complete the set, they want it in a slab, they want it on their shelf, they want it on their comic wall, and that's one of the reasons why people are thinking this is a good time to buy this book once again, because the prices have generally corrected. And being that this is a book that didn't really have any spec value, I think that this book was definitely getting way too expensive for what it was, and I think people now are seeing the prices and thinking, hey, this is the time to buy once again. And as we dig into the numbers, let's take a look at some of the values here. There's actually one 9.9 on the census, but let's look at the 9.8s. 158 on the census, fair market value is 350, 30 moving 330, but you can definitely see this is one of those books that basically had no movement, in the last, say, 10 years or so, right? This is a book that generally speaking trades sideways for the most part. I'm sure that, there are times when people are excited about Star Wars where it sells for a little bit higher, but this is not necessarily a book that has that spec value that's going to go up in value. But in 2021, prices got crazy for this thing like they did with all books, and now kind of where it's setting back in line is back to sort of where it should have been selling this whole time. And that's my theory as to why people are buying back in on this book. And then, of course, 1976, not going to see it always slapped at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can actually find them being sold around that $10, $15, $20 range. All right, let's go on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is one that is curiously related to, the movie Wakanda Forever that came out this last weekend. But this one right here is Black Panther #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 70th slot. And what is the significance of of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1976, written by Jack Kirby, that would feature the first solo series for the character Black Panther. Now, this book right here is one of those books that I would say is a contender for, a top key for Black Panther due to the fact that it is the first issue of the title character. But, I feel like this book is often overlooked simply due to the fact that, it's close enough in terms of era and price point where you could actually find yourself getting an FF52. So I feel like this is one of those books that is kind of in sort of a purgatory as far as its values are concerned and how much significance it has. But this is still an important book, one that kicked off the Black Panther series. And this is an interesting one to talk about because, even though we didn't have T'Challa in the Wakanda Forever film, it does go to show that, high tide raises all ships. Anytime you have a book that has any connection to whatever is going on in the movie, people are going to be thinking about it. Now, with that being said, this is not necessarily a book that is going up in value. This is a book that people are probably just thinking about and purchasing as the prices have corrected. And I would actually say this is probably one of the most painful 2021 purchases that someone has ever had. Because if we go down here to the 9.8s, there's 233 on the census. Fair market value is 975. But this is definitely a book that has really, really tanked. I mean, look at that graph. Look at how drastic that is. Somebody actually paid $4,500 in February of 2021 for a 9.8, where they could have had it, in this last month at the recent sale of 935. So of all of the books I have seen out there in the market, this is one of the most drastic 9.8 purchases to, a correction that I think that I've ever seen. I mean, we're talking, a 5x loss of money there on this particular book. But, it's just sort of one or two sales. All it takes is two people to really get overzealous. And that's really one of the reasons why you're seeing a quote unquote crash, so to speak. 9.6s have 741 on the census. Fair market value is 375. And then, of course, 1976 book, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade. But when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can see them being sold around that $75 to $100 range. All right, let's go on now to the number one trending comic of the week. And the number one trending comic of the week is one that is probably no surprise. This one right here is Black Panther volume number 3, number 2, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 37th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 2005, written by Reginald Hudlin, and would feature the first appearance of the character known as Shuri. Now, of course, for most of this video, we've been talking about Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I think that it is clear why this book is on the list this week. Shuri was the lead of the Wakanda Forever movie. I think it is not a spoiler to say Shuri took up the mantle of Black Panther, and I think a lot of people were thinking about picking up this book for that reason. Now, this is a book like the Riri Williams one, like the Black Panther 1, and like a lot of the other books that are sort of related to Namor that have had a major correction in lead up to the movie. I mean, there could be a multitude of reasons for that. Obviously the times are tough, economy is hard, comic book prices are coming back in line. So, this book was never going to be able to keep up the value that it was selling for in 2021, at least at a natural rate. But, when we talk about those values, this is now a pretty good time to buy this thing because, we're talking about prices that are kind of going in line to that of their 2021s. And maybe people came out of the movie Wakanda Forever. They said, hey, I kind of liked it overall. I think Shuri's pretty cool. Let me pick up that Black Panther number 2 book. The prices don't seem too bad. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of those values here. 9.8s have 904 on the census. Fair market value is 350. 30-day moving 320. Definitely a book that kind of had a similar graph to that of the Riri Williams book, where you kind of see the roller coaster kind of goes up. Speculation, even all the way in 2020, there was speculation for this thing going into 2021. Height of the market in September of 2021, and then we've been on the kind of steep decline ever since then to now where it's selling at around the $318 level is, kind of not too much further than where it was going for in 2020. Although, you could say that even in the end of 2020, this book was actually selling for more than that because the speculation kind of came around this, middle of summer time, which, could have been due to the fact that maybe that was, around the conversation of when people were thinking that Shuri was going to be taking up sort of the mantle of the character. Then, of course, down here at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade. I mean, it's a 2005 book, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you see them being sold around that $70, $80, maybe $100 level. Now, before I wrap up the video, I did want to talk a little bit about the Heritage auctions that came this past weekend. Heritage did their signature sale, which is, some of the biggest books that they put out, kind of on a yearly basis. Now, I did do a live stream a few days ago where I did follow some of the sales, and there were some kind of cool moments, some cool reactions that we had in that, live stream with the chat and just talking about some of the books. I didn't think I was going to do kind of a recap of the, sale overall, so I did kind of want to just quickly use this opportunity to talk about some of the books out there in the market and give my overall conclusions. An 8.5 AF-15 sold for $552,000, which, on paper seems like a really big number. Last couple sales, though, were 810. There was one that happened a few months back, and then a few months before that, there was a $700,000 sale. But, this $552,000 one is definitely weaker in comparison to those two. But, we're kind of looking at the trend line. If you date it back to 2020, 552 is actually a pretty good sale for this book. So, again, I think with what we're sort of seeing in the market is that, like I'd said in some of my index videos, all books, no matter the grade, no matter the price, are going to get reset back down to the trend line. Specifically, if we're talking, silver and bronze age, that is just generally what is going to happen. So the $800,000 sale that happened for the AF-15 8.5 was just way too high. It was just way too high. That was a moment in time. That was a blip in the radar. This ASM number 1 at the 9.6 grade went for $336,000, which is actually a massive record for this book. So ASM number 1 with a very strong showing. This Detective Comics 168, highest grade on the census, $324,000. That is a lot of money for sure. Big sale for that one. Superman number 1, 1.8 sold for $288,000. A lot of people are going to talk about that being a huge sale, and it is a big sale, but it's also kind of not that surprising if you think about some of the recent comps for what that book sold for at like the 3.0 range and things like that. This Marvel Comics number 1 at the 3.0 range, I think was actually a really weak sale for this book at $223,000. That is a book that is shockingly didn't sell for more. A lot of the books like FF1 and X-Men 1 are kind of retracing back to their trend line. 9.8 FF49 sold for $200K. That is a huge sale for that book, but there were only 2 9.8s on the census. This 9.2 Tales of Suspense 39 went for $168. That is a massive sale for that book as well. So, a lot of the sales, a lot of the books, it really depends on, did they have sales sort of recently in the kind of heights of the market, and are they being repriced now? Some of the books that didn't necessarily have those sales during those peaks, I think are kind of selling now at the appropriate prices. Like this 9.8 ASM 50 set its record price at $100,000. But I also wonder, if this book came up for sale, at the height of the market, would that have actually sold for higher than that due to all, sort of the hype and the speculation? But overall, there are a lot of interesting sales to talk about. Definitely go check out the live stream if you guys kind of want to hear my, really detailed breakdown of what happened in that pedigree sale. Anyways, that's all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics of the week. Let me know what you guys think. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. I'll see you in the next video.